Picture Isaac Newton standing in, well, the absolute void. He is holding a pair of dice. These are the dice that Niels Bohr told us God plays with, right? The dice that represent the fundamental randomness of quantum mechanics, the idea that at the bottom of everything, reality is just a game of chance. Now, imagine Newton closing his hand. He crushes them, and when he opens his palm, the dice are dust. In their place is a glowing, rotating Pythagorean triangle. They told you the universe was random. They told you God plays dice. Liars. The dice are just the 4 internal boosts of the Aetheron. You're not unlucky, you just can't see the 12th dimension. The clock is ticking and it's deterministic. Welcome to the debate.
Welcome to the debate, and wow, that is certainly a provocative way to begin.
I thought you'd like that.
It gets the attention, I'll give you that. You're quoting the Death of the Dice manifesto from the source material we are covering today. We are looking at a radical new model, supersymmetric geometric quantum mechanics. And I promise our listeners that is the only time I will say that full mouthful today.
Thank goodness for that. We're just going to call it SGQM, or Buscemi's model, after the author.
Right. So we are looking at a theory that attempts to do what physics has struggled with for nearly a century, which is unifying the rigid, beautiful certainty of gravity with the probabilistic and frankly messy fuzziness of quantum mechanics.
Exactly. I must establish the central question of our debate right here at the top. Is the universe a casino? Is it a collection of probabilities and wave functions that only decide what to do when we look at them? Or is it a machine, a 12-dimensional geometric lattice where what we call empty space is actually a living, rotating solid, and every single event is mathematically inevitable?
It is a massive question, and I'll be representing the side of caution today. I'm defending empirical evidence and the standard scientific method. Because, let's be honest, the standard model of particle physics is arguably the most successful theory in human history. It predicts the behavior of the subatomic world with staggering precision, to 12 decimal places in some cases. So to suggest, as Buscemi does, that we should just abandon the concept of probability and the very idea that light travels through space, well, that requires extraordinary evidence. I'm here to defend the observable reality we know against what I might call mathematical idealism.
And I completely see why you'd frame it that way. But I am here to argue that modern physics has hit a wall, a hard wall. We have dark matter and dark energy supposedly making up 95% of the universe, and we have absolutely no idea what they are.
We have theories.
Theories, sure, but no proof. And we have a mismatch between gravity and quantum mechanics that has lasted for 80 years. The standard model is great at predicting what happens, but it is terrible at explaining why.
Buscemi flips the script entirely. He says the stage is the actor. The model proposes that the Aetheron is a 12-dimensional manifold. It's a lattice structure. What we call particles, forces, and even time are just different rotational modes of this singular fabric.
The geometric soul of the universe, as the text calls it. Precisely. My position is that the randomness we think we see in quantum mechanics is simply a lack of perspective. We are looking at a 2-dimensional shadow of a 12-dimensional object. If you could see the full geometry, that whole spooky action at a distance thing vanishes. There is no randomness. There's only complex, higher-dimensional geometry that we just haven't been looking at. And the beauty of this source material is that while it is built on rigorous math, it focuses on the visual and conceptual mapping. It gives you a simple, visual way to understand how reality is structured. You don't need a PhD to see the shapes he is describing.
And that is exactly where I have to push back immediately. I appreciate the desire for order. I really do. Einstein wanted it too, right? He famously hated the dice. But saying that empty space is actually a rigid 12-dimensional solid, this Aetheron, it creates massive conceptual problems. If space is a solid lattice, how do we move through it? If light doesn't travel, how do we see distant stars? My stance is that while the geometric mapping Buscemi proposes is elegant and honestly quite beautiful to look at, it asks us to discard experimental intuition that has held up for hundreds of years. You're asking us to trade a map that works for a map that looks pretty.
I think your intuition is about to be challenged, though. Let's get right into the heart of the theory. The entire model rests on one foundational equation, the Aetheron theorem.
Yes, the new Pythagorean identity.
It is the absolute cornerstone. The equation is read as alpha squared equals mu squared plus E rot squared.
Right.
Now, we need to be very precise here for our listeners. Alpha is the conserved invariant. Think of it as the hypotenuse of a right triangle. Mu represents mass, which is the Fermatid projection. And E rot, and we should clarify, that rot subscript stands specifically for rotational energy, representing the energy from transverse rotational modes. That is the bosonic projection.
Okay, so he is taking the most famous relation in all of geometry, basic a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and saying that the entire universe fits into it. On one side you have mass, on the other you have rotational energy, and they are bound by this constant alpha. But I have to ask you, is this just numerology? I mean, you can fit numbers into a triangle all day long. What makes this actual physics?
Because it's not just that they are bound, it is that they are orthogonal. This is the key. In this 12-dimensional manifold, mass and energy are not separate things. They are the exact same rotational state, just viewed from different angles, specifically 90 degrees apart. The Aetheron invariant alpha enforces a structural floor. If you increase the mass, the rotational energy has to adjust automatically to keep that hypotenuse stable.
Well, let's unpack that. I will concede there is a certain elegance to linking the fine structure constant alpha to a geometric property. In standard physics, alpha is usually just an empirical number. It's roughly 1 over 137. We measure it, but we don't really know why it has the value it does. It just is. Buscemi is saying it's the hypotenuse of reality.
Exactly. It stops being this random number we measured in a lab and becomes a geometric necessity. It has to be that number because of the geometry of the lattice itself.
But here is my issue. You're describing a static triangle. A triangle drawn on a piece of paper doesn't do anything. But the universe is dynamic. Things move, things change, stars explode. How can a simple right triangle explain the incredible complexity of, say, a particle accelerator?
Because the triangle isn't static. It is rotating. The text explicitly describes it as a dynamic Pythagorean identity. Imagine this triangle spinning through 12 dimensions. As it rotates, the projection of that triangle onto our four-dimensional world changes. At one phase of the rotation, it looks like mass. That is your fermion. Rotate at 90 degrees, and it looks like energy. That is your boson.
So you are saying a particle isn't a physical thing sitting in space. It's a rotational event of space itself.
Yes, and this explains beautifully why mass and energy are conserved. They are just trading places on the legs of the triangle. The hypotenuse never changes. That is the Aetheron invariant. And it eliminates all those nasty divergences and singularities that plague standard quantum field theory because the geometry simply prevents values from going to infinity. You literally cannot have a triangle with a leg longer than the hypotenuse.
Okay, that is a clever way to handle mathematical singularities, I'll give you that. Standard physics often breaks down when values go to infinity, like at the center of a black hole. But let's move to the part of this theory that is going to give most traditional physicists a migraine, the non-propagation hypothesis.
I suspected this would be your main sticking point.
It is a massive sticking point. The standard view, the view that is built GPS, lasers, the internet, is that if I turn on a light bulb, photons, which are particles of light, shoot out of the bulb and travel through empty space to my eye. Buscemi argues that nothing travels.
Correct. The Aetheron model states that fields, whether that's gravity, electromagnetism, or light, do not propagate as waves through space. Instead, they are reconfigurations of space.
But we can measure the speed of light. We know it takes roughly 8 minutes for light to get from the sun to Earth. If nothing is traveling, why is there a delay? Why doesn't the sunlight just hit us instantly?
Let me use the analogy from the source material, which I find incredibly helpful here, the waterbed analogy.
Okay.
Imagine a large, water-filled mattress. If you push down hard on one corner, the internal pressure equalizes across the entire volume instantly. The lattice, or the water in this case, is a unified solid.
I follow the analogy, the water inside is the Aetheron.
Right. The pressure change is global and immediate. However, the surface ripple, the actual wave you see moving on top of the bed, takes time to travel across. Buscemi argues the Aetheron is a solid rotating lattice. When an event happens, like a star igniting, the lattice updates its phase geometry holistically, everywhere at once. And that actually explains quantum entanglement and non-locality perfectly. The spooky action is just the lattice resynchronizing.
So the pressure is instantaneous, which explains why entangled particles react instantly regardless of distance. Because they are part of the same waterbed?
Exactly. But the measurable signal, what you and I would call a photon or a gravitational wave, is the surface ripple. It is bound by the decoupling limit of the lattice. That physical limit is what we perceive as the speed of light.
So light isn't a particle flying through the void. It's a, what did the text call it? A geometric snap unfolding across the lattice?
A self-modulating resonance. Think of it like a line of falling dominoes. The individual dominoes don't travel from the start of the line to the finish. The pattern travels. The dominoes just tip over in place. The Aetheron is the dominoes.
That is a highly compelling image, but I have to play the skeptic. If the lattice updates instantly, this global reconfiguration, doesn't that fundamentally violate relativity? Einstein was very specific that nothing, not even information, can travel faster than light. If the lattice updates instantly, you are breaking causality. You could theoretically know something happened before the light reached you.
This is where the nuance is absolutely crucial. The geometry updates holistically. The underlying phase structure connects everything instantly. That's the hidden variables. But the decodable signal, the actual thing you can use to send a text message or physically see a star, is limited by the time it takes for the 1440-degree cycles to register the shift. Causality is preserved in our observable dimension, but at the foundational level of the Aetheron, the connection is immediate. It doesn't break relativity. It creates a substrate beneath relativity.
You mentioned 1440 degrees there, and that brings us to the next major pillar of this theory, the 8-pi cycle.
Yes, this is exactly how SGQM solves supersymmetry.
For our listeners, let's clarify what we mean by spin. In standard physics, we deal with quantum spin. If you rotate a fermion, like an electron, 360 degrees, it doesn't actually return to its original state. You have to rotate it 720 degrees, or 4 pi, to get it back to normal. It's a weird, counterintuitive quirk of quantum mechanics, but we verify it in the lab all the time.
Correct. Spin 1/2 particles need a double turn. But Buscemi argues that 4 pi only solves the matter side of the equation. If you want to truly unify matter, the fermions, and force, the bosons, you need to close the whole loop. You need another 4 pi.
So 720 degrees for the matter and another 720 degrees for the force?
An 8-pi cycle, a 1440-degree cycle. The model posits that as the Aetheron rotates, it spends the first half of the cycle manifesting as a fermion, which is mass. Then, via the internal axes of the lattice, it rotates into the second phase and manifests as a boson, which is force.
And this is why he calls it supersymmetric. He isn't looking for entirely new partner particles like selectrons or photinos in the Large Hadron Collider.
No, he's not. And that is a critical point. We have spent billions, literally billions of dollars, building massive colliders to look for those supersymmetric partners, and we haven't found a single one. SGQM says we haven't found them because they aren't separate particles. The electron is its own partner. The fermion and the boson are just different phases of the exact same spinning Aetheron geometry.
I have to admit, that is a very tidy solution to the missing superpartners problem. It suggests we've been looking for a ghost in the machine when the machine itself is just changing shape. But I am still stuck on the why. Why 12 dimensions? Why not 10 like in string theory, or 11 like in M theory?
It comes down to the strict math of the rotation group, spin 12. The text specifies that spin 12 has exactly 66 generators. These generators are the degrees of freedom, the literal ways the lattice is allowed to twist and fold.
And this connects to the chemistry aspect, doesn't it? This is the part of the theory I actually found the most surprising. Usually, theory of everything candidates stick to black holes and quarks. They rarely bother with the periodic table. It's usually considered too messy for high-energy physics.
That is exactly why I find this material so persuasive. It grounds the high-level abstract math in the actual stuff we learned in high school chemistry. We all know the electron shells, right? 2, 8, 18, 32.
Right, the 2n squared rule.
Right. In standard quantum mechanics, we treat those numbers as just outcomes of wave functions and probabilities. We shrug and say, well, the math just works out that way. But Buscemi asks, why those specific numbers? Why does the second shell hold exactly 8 electrons? Why not 7? Why not 9?
And his answer is the generators.
Yes. He maps the electron shells directly to the Aetheron resonance ladder. Shell 1 holds 2 electrons. That corresponds perfectly to the foundational spin pair of the Aetheron. Shell 2 holds 8 electrons. That corresponds to the activation of the 8 internal axes, R1 through R8.
So the 8 in the periodic table isn't just a random quantum allowance, it's a hard physical limit of the 8-dimensional internal fiber of the universe.
Precisely. And shell 3 holds 18? That matches the expansion into the next set of generator symmetries.
The theory presents the helical periodic table. It argues that elements are not just blocks in a flat row, they are resonant modes on a spiral. As you move up the spiral, you are unlocking more and more dimensions of the Aetheron.
The exact phrase used in the text was, the periodic table is a shadow of a 12-dimensional object.
It is. The stability of noble gases, the high reactivity of halogens, these are geometric necessities. If the Aetheron lattice is a real rotating solid, then atoms are just the knots in that lattice. You can only tie knots in specific ways allowed by the 12-dimensional geometry. I will grant you the derivation of the shell capacities from the geometry of spin 12 is mathematically seductive. It gives a deep structural reason for chemistry. But I have to step back into my role as the dissenter here. This model replaces randomness with a rigid, 12-dimensional rotating solid.
Yes, it does.
That is a return to a pre-Einsteinian, almost Newtonian determinism, but on steroids. If everything is just the ticking of a 12-dimensional clock, where is free will? Where is the chaos? Where is the life in that?
The chaos is an illusion caused by our limited view. Death of the dice, remember? The advocate for this theory would say that our comfort with randomness is just scientific laziness. It is giving up on finding the root cause. SGQM says the cause is there. It's just encoded in the hidden axis, R1 through R8. Just because we can't see the gears doesn't mean the clock isn't ticking.
But let's look at the real-world risks of adopting this. The standard model is built on gauge theories and propagating fields, and it works. If we accept the non-propagation hypothesis, we have to rewrite optics, gravitational wave astronomy, and quantum field theory from scratch. We have to accept that when LIGO detects a black hole merger, it's not receiving a wave that traveled a billion light-years. It's feeling a global phase shift in the lattice. That is a massive, massive conceptual leap.
It is a leap, but does that leap not explain the data better? The text mentions that this model actually solves the black hole information paradox. In standard physics, if you throw a book into a black hole, the information is destroyed, and that famously breaks quantum mechanics. But in SGQM, the black hole isn't a hole at all. It is a topological inversion. The lattice simply folds in on itself. The information is perfectly preserved in the higher dimensions, the R-axes. It never leaves the universe. It just rotates out of our four-dimensional view.
Okay, that is a fair point. The information paradox is a huge embarrassment for standard physics. We've been fighting over it for 50 years. And I can see how a solid universe preserves information by default. You can't just delete a physical part of the lattice.
Amount of energy, but we measure 0. SGQM says, well, of course it's 0 in 4 dimensions. The energy is all locked up in the internal rotation, the E-rot, of the 8 hidden dimensions. The balance is mathematically perfect. Alpha squared equals mu squared plus E-rot squared. The hypotenuse holds it all together.
It is a neatly closed system. I see the appeal. It answers the fine-tuning problem.
why the constants of nature are what they are, by making them geometric features. Pi, phi, the golden ratio, and alpha are the geometric heartbeat, as the text says.
It really changes the way you look at the world. You aren't walking through empty space. You are moving through a dense, living, rotating mechanism.
And I really must emphasize this, it is a mechanism we cannot see directly. We can only infer it. And extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. The Standard Model has withstood every single test we've thrown at it. SGQM is a beautiful cathedral of logic, but until we can experimentally verify that non-propagation is real, or that the electron is actually rotating through 1440 degrees, it remains a mathematical dream.
But there are predictions. The text mentions that the fine structure constant alpha should vary slightly near high-gravity environments because the hypotenuse is under physical stress. That is testable.
It is testable. And if we ever find that alpha is not constant, this theory becomes a front-runner very quickly. But until then, I'm sticking with the dice.
So, wrapping up, where do you land on all of this?
I look at this material and I see a paradigm shift that is mathematically rigorous, but philosophically terrifying to a modern physicist. We love our probabilities. They give us wiggle room. This theory locks us into a crystal lattice of fate. It is visually intuitive, especially that Newton triangle imagery, but abandoning the vacuum for a solid Aetheron feels like going back to the 19th century, just with much better math.
I see it completely differently. I think we have been staring at shadows on the wall of Plato's cave, calling them probabilities and wave functions. Buscemi is offering us a clear look at the object casting the shadow. The Aetheron model suggests that the universe is not a fuzzy roll of the dice. It is a precision instrument.
A living geometry?
Precisely. Where mass, energy, and even consciousness are simply harmonics of the exact same fundamental rotation.
It is certainly a theory that stays with you. I don't think I will look at a simple right triangle the same way again.
Nor will I. And I hope our listeners take a moment today to look at the empty space in front of them. Really look at it.
And wonder if it's truly empty, or if it's a ticking, rotating mechanism you just can't see yet.
Welcome to the debate.